Good morning, friends. Welcome to Ecoholics YouTube channel. My name is Avinash and in this video I'll be discussing with you economics current affairs for 10th September 2024. So friends, I have selected two important articles from the Mint newspaper, and as you all may remember from yesterday's session, we have two topics that were left to be discussed. So we'll be discussing those two topics as well, right? So आज हमारे सामने थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा काम है because essentially I have four important articles that I want to discuss with you. Thankfully, all these four important articles are dealing with distinct areas or distinct topics, right? So your understanding, your learning should be immense, right? And आप लोगों को काफी मजा आना चाहिए in both these discussions. So what I will do is that I will discuss first article from here, then I will discuss these two articles, and then I will come back and discuss this article. You will understand why I am doing this when I am doing this, right? So let's understand the first article from today, that is 10 September, right? So जो इंडिया की सेमीकंडक्टर चिप मैन्युफैक्चरिंग के जो प्लान्स है उसके बारे में वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट इन दिस फर्स्ट आर्टिकल. आप जानते हैं कि इंडिया इज टाइंग अप पार्टनरशिप्स विथ यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स, with European Union, and now with Singapore as well, right? And these partnerships are aimed at making India a hub of semiconductor chip manufacturing. आप जानते हैं that इंडिया के अंदर we are getting investments, right, from Micron. Apart from that, the Tata Group is also partnering with TSMC. The Adanis are also partnering with Tower of Israel, right? And all these partnerships are basically aimed at making India a hub for chip manufacturing, right? So let us understand what India is doing. This is a very beautiful article, very positive article, very informative article about what we have done so far to promote chip manufacturing in India. This is a very beautiful article. So guys, like I said that हमने एक pact, एक agreement sign करा है with Singapore, right? With the idea that we want to become manufacturers of chips. Why do we want to become manufacturers of chips? Why is it that हम इतना ज़्यादा इसके ऊपर focus कर रहे हैं? Because chips are very critical, right? So whether it is electric vehicles or solar panels or artificial intelligence applications or electronic devices or drones, none of these can be made without, let's say, chips, right? So in that sense, chips are extremely important, okay? And chips के अंदर we see बार में that there is shortages, right? Because of one reason or the other. There is supply chain disruption because of one reason or the other. There is a lot of geopolitical tension between US and China. So China is controlling a major chunk of chip manufacturing across the world, right? US has access to a lot of technology that is used for chip manufacturing and so on, right? So ये सारी चीजों को ध्यान में रखते हुए, keeping in mind input shortages, keeping in mind supply chain disruptions, keeping in mind geopolitical tensions, it is extremely crucial to have some level of self-reliance in chip manufacturing. Any country which wants to be a reasonable superpower going ahead needs to have at least some level of self-reliance, some level of importance when it comes to the chip manufacturing ecosystem, right? इसी चीज को ध्यान में रखते हुए, it's not just us, but a lot of countries that are now investing in chip making, chip designing, or in some part of the chip ecosystem. Almost every country understands that they need to diversify their suppliers, right? You cannot be overly dependent only upon a handful of countries, right? So the idea over here being that you are trying to diversify your suppliers despite the fact that this entire ecosystem is dominated by a few countries: US, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. These are few countries who are absolutely dominating the ecosystem, right? अब इंडिया की बात करें, so India wants to set up fabs. What are fabs? Wafer fabrication units are called fabs, right? तो इन fabs के अंदर या इन units के अंदर we will basically be manufacturing semiconductor chips, right? So हम क्यों बनाना चाहते हैं अपने खुद के fabs, खुद की chips? Because we want to reduce cost. Because अगर हमारा खुद का semiconductor chip है, obviously it will be cheaper than what we import from. Secondly, we want to reduce uncertainty around the availability of chips, right? I don't know whether you remember this or not, but थोड़े टाइम पहले there was a huge shortage of semiconductor chips, and India का जो automobile production था, that suffered very badly because of the same. If you look at that history, right, then that clearly tells you that there has to be some level of self-reliance, some level of assurity that yes, chips will be available in India, right? So जो इंडिया के agreements हैं, they are tackling different aspects of the problem, right? So we have an agreement with US, we have an agreement with EU, now we have an agreement with Singapore. तो जो यूएस वाला agreement है, it is focusing on supply chain resilience, it is focusing on R&D, it is focusing on developing talent and skills. EU agreement is again speaking about R&D and innovation, talent creation, partnerships, and exchange of market information, right? And Singapore agreement, it is giving us access to advanced technologies, proficient workforce, cutting edge tech universities, wafer fab parks, business friendly environment, strong IP, and a gateway to the Southeast Asian markets. If you ask me honestly, right, so this is a very practical agreement that we have done with Singapore, right? When our objective is to become one of the major destinations of chip manufacturing, this kind of an agreement should be very, very helpful. Why it should be very helpful? If you look at Singapore, right? So Singapore के अंदर some of the best companies are there so far as design, manufacture, package, and testing of chips, right? So major global players are present in Singapore, right? If you look at the nature of chips that Singapore is manufacturing, so that's very similar to what India is doing, right? जो Singapore है, right? So they are making chips of 28 nanometers or more. That's exactly what India plans to do. इस plan का काफी criticism हुआ है from the likes of Raghuram Rajan, right? But India is also planning to make the same 28 nanometers or more wala chips, right? These bigger chips or fatter chips, they are used in appliances, they are used in cars, they are used in industrial equipment, right? Taiwan etc. जैसे countries जो है, they are making 7 nanometers and less का chips which are used for smartphones, laptops, and AI models. We are not going in this direction. We can't go in this direction because हमारे पास technological capability exist नहीं करती है to make 7 nanometers and less का chips. What we are trying to do over here is that we want to make these 28 nanometers or more का chips. So it's not as if that they are not going to have any use. So fact that Singapore is already doing it, fact that investors are there in Singapore who are doing it, fact that India is also coming along the same road means that probably as Singapore moves ahead on the technology curve, that investment, that entire ecosystem can probably be attracted into India. That's just one way of looking at it, right? Singapore के अंदर labor, fuel, electricity cost is not low, right? Despite that, Singapore is able to present itself as an attractive destination for manufacturing of these chips. अगर हम इंडिया की बात करें, so what are India's advantages? What is it that we have achieved already, right? So we definitely have a strong talent pool when it comes to software engineering, industrial equipment, and so on. We have 2000 semiconductor design engineers. We have Intel, Texas, Nvidia, AMD, and Qualcomm का design and R&D centers in India. Lot of projects have already been tied up. Like for example, 4 projects have been approved worth $1.5 trillion, right? उसमें Micron का project आ जाता है, Tata Electronics का project आ जाता है along with TSMC. उसके अंदर अडानी ग्रुप का project आ जाता है with Israel's Tower Semiconductor, right? So these are the projects which have already been tied up. We have set aside a $10 billion का semiconductor fund, right? इस fund को use करके we want to create an ecosystem in India. Important point over here is that we can use this fund to give subsidies and attract big chip makers into India. That will be very, very good. Why is it that India is focusing on 28 nanometers and more ka chips and not on 7 nanometers and less ka chips? The reason is that if you look at these 28 nanometers and more ka chips, A, the initial investment, upfront investment is less. B, your applications are there, like for example in industries and automotives and so on, uska application is very much there, right? And it is unlikely to get outmoded or outdated very soon. So 28 nanometers and more ka chips is a starting point for India, right? What we need to ensure is that yes, the funding is there, yes, the intent is there, yes, the partnerships are there. Now we need to ensure that there is a speedy execution of these projects on ground, right? Mission mode के अंदर we have to ensure that these projects get implemented on ground. So this is my submission regarding chips. Now I will go back to my yesterday's discussions and I will finish off these 2 articles over here, right? Very important articles, and then I will subsequently come back to the questions that you all can try to answer. Okay, so we are thinking of creating a sovereign wealth fund, right? We are thinking of creating a sovereign wealth fund, right? So what we are trying to do, what we are planning to do is that we are pooling our shares. We are planning to pool shares in listed PSUs, right? And us pooled set of shares say we will create a sovereign wealth fund, right? So The idea over here is that it will sell new and existing shares. This fund, it will receive dividends, it will raise money from strategic investors, it will be borrowing against its shares, right, to raise capital for investment corpus. So this is an indirect way of setting up a sovereign wealth fund. First of all, what is a sovereign wealth fund? अब जैसे to give you a very famous example, right? So नॉर्वे ने क्या करा कि नॉर्वे realized that they are sitting on crude oil reserves. Okay, so they started pumping that crude oil and they started supplying it to the rest of the world. एंड जो क्रूड ऑयल बेच बेच के जो पेट्रो डॉलर्स आए, जो क्रूड ऑयल बेच बेच के जो पेट्रो डॉलर्स आए, उन पेट्रो डॉलर्स को नॉर्वे ने खर्चा नहीं कर दिया, लाइक लेट्स से वेनेजुएला. व्हाट डिड नॉर्वे डू? नॉर्वे kept or invested or parked these dollars into a sovereign wealth fund, right? And then they used these dollars, or they used the corpus that was created to invest in दुनिया भर का stocks, assets and so on and so forth, and they are generating fabulous levels of return from that sovereign wealth fund. And the money that they have invested and the returns that they are generating are now being used to fund education, healthcare, housing, nutrition, transportation, sustainability, and all kinds of social and economic challenges in Norway have been essentially solved, right? So आप देखेंगे कि उन्होंने एक sovereign wealth fund बनाया, right? उस sovereign wealth fund को systematically invest करा, उससे returns generate करे और उससे अपने बहुत सारे problems को solve कर दिया. एंड दुनिया के भी बहुत सारे प्रॉब्लम्स को अब लोग वो अब दे आर ट्राइंग टू सॉल्व यूजिंग दैट सॉवरेन वेल्थ फंड. ठीक है गाइस, सो दैट्स जस्ट गिविंग यू वन एग्जांपल ऑफ सॉवरेन वेल्थ फंड. सो व्हाट इज सॉवरेन वेल्थ फंड? सो इट्स लाइक कंट्रीज या गवर्नमेंट्स उस फंड के एक प्रकार से ओनर्स या उस प्रकार के ये होते हैं, राइट, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर्स होते हैं, एंड दे एडमिनिस्टर द फंड कीपिंग द एंड गोल of socio-economic development, long-term development, sustainable development, inclusive development, rapid development in mind. Fund को use करते हैं to achieve these objectives, right? So 40 countries, they have sovereign wealth funds which they use to buy critical assets, back large corporations, build infrastructure, and also solve the problems that I spoke about. ठीक है? So now India is also thinking on these lines, guys, right? So what is it that the government of India can do? कि जो PSUs है उनके शेयर्स को जो है सॉवरेन वेल्थ फंड में ट्रांसफर कर दो, उन शेयर्स को जो है फिर उन कंपनीज को बेटर मैनेज करो, उसमें स्ट्रेटेजिक डिसइन्वेस्टमेंट करो, उसका डिविडेंड्स रिसीव करो, मतलब पैसे से पैसा बनेगा, एंड देन वी कैन यूज दैट मनी, राइट? सो गवर्नमेंट के जो लिस्टेड PSUs के अंदर शेयर्स हैं, जो स्पेसिफाइड अंडरटेकिंग्स ऑफ UTI के जो शेयर्स हैं, राइट, यूनिट ट्रस्ट ऑफ इंडिया के जो शेयर्स हैं, राइट, सो दीज विल बी ट्रांसफर्ड टू दिस फंड, राइट? And government owned SUTI, it holds shares in various private listed companies also, right? So when mutual fund was not sexy, so UTI was the mutual fund of India, right? When mutual fund industry in India was not sexy, UTI was the mutual fund investor in India, and UTI जो है काफी पैसा लगा के बैठा है in a variety of private listed companies, right? So ये जो प्लान है ये काफी अर्ली स्टेजेस के अंदर, इट इज स्टिल बीइंग डिस्कस्ड एट वेरियस लेवल्स, राइट? अब ये जो लिस्टेड PSUs के जो शेयर्स हैं, दे कैन हेल्प इन क्रिएटिंग अ 50 ट्रिलियन रुपीस का कॉर्पस, राइट? एंड the idea over here is that if you once create the corpus, then using this corpus you can try to achieve something. ठीक है? So इंडिया एंड अब्रॉड के अंदर जो भी हमारे को क्रिटिकल एसेट्स बाय कर रहे हैं, टेक्नोलॉजी बाय कर रही है, वी कैन डू दैट. सो इन वन ऑफ द रीसेंट आर्टिकल्स देयर वाज अ क्रिटिसिज्म that India or Indians, they are lagging behind when it comes to buying critical technologies, buying critical assets across the world is concerned. We are lagging behind. Why are we lagging behind? Because India के अंदर जो है ना, capital convertibility is not there, capital account convertibility is not there. So you can invest abroad from India, but there are severe limits to that, right? There are serious limits to that. So agar we can create this kind of a fund, and then using this kind of a fund we can invest in India and abroad, and especially abroad buying technologies, buying assets, critical ones, then that could be really fabulous, right? So सरकार के पास जो है ना दोस्तों 51% से ज्यादा स्टेक है 48 पब्लिकली ट्रेडेड कंपनीज के अंदर, राइट? So this stake as well as everything else around this can be transferred to this sovereign wealth fund, right? Government can sell new shares in these PSUs without voting rights, right? So voting right भी dilute नहीं होगा, पैसा भी raise हो जाएगा, right? Apart from that, it may bring in regulations for the so-called golden shares, which gives its owner relatively more power in terms of management and economic rights and special control. I am not so sure how fantastic this idea of golden shares in PSUs is, because we have to ultimately give strategic autonomy to PSUs. We have to bring in world-class investors in PSUs. We have to make our PSUs some of the largest giants in the world. That's what our objective is. And I don't know how much of the journey can be done under the stewardship of government of India. इसके लिए हमारे को बाहर से बंदे लाने पड़ेंगे. But anyways, let's see, right? So काफी सारे एक्सपर्ट्स एंड इकोनॉमिस्ट्स एंड लोगों को इसमें इन्वॉल्व करा गया है. दिस इज अ वेरी फेमस नेम, नीलेश शाह, राइट. ही इज बेसिकली द मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर ऑफ कोटक महिंद्रा एसेट मैनेजमेंट कंपनी. So if you open Money Control or if you watch Money Control every almost second day, you will hear a bite from or see a bite from Nilesh Shah, right? So the idea is that this is still something that we are just starting off, right? So we are planning to create a sovereign fund, right? We'll run it by professionals, right? Singapore ka Temasek, right, is a model that we are having in mind, right? So the idea over here is that कि टेमासेक के अंदर बहुत सारे जो लार्ज एंड प्रेस्टिजियस कॉर्पोरेशंस हैं, राइट. सो उनके जो कॉर्पसेस हैं उसके थ्रू क्रिएट करा गया है, एंड दे हैव मेड अ लॉट ऑफ अग्रेसिव इन्वेस्टमेंट्स अब्रॉड, राइट. सो दैट्स व्हाट इज द आइडिया ओवर हियर, ठीक है. सो बहुत बड़े लेवल के ऊपर वी वांट टू क्रिएट अ फंड, एंड नाउ आई एम जस्ट बिकमिंग रिपीटेटिव, सो आई एम जस्ट गोइंग टू लीव दिस ओवर हियर दैट 40 countries are having this kind of sovereign wealth fund, right? Whether it is China, US, Russia, even you would say Pakistan, Indonesia and Malaysia are having these funds, right? To name some important funds, right? So Norway's government pension fund global, Singapore ka Temasek, Abu Dhabi ka investment authority, Qatar ki investment authority, right? And Mubadala investment company, right? Countries such as China and US, they also have multiple funds, ठीक है. So we are going essentially on these lines, ठीक है. अब इससे हम कर क्या सकते हैं, right? So the idea over here is that we can secure rare earth metals such as lithium, ठीक है. We can get critical mineral blocks on a G2G, that is a government to government basis, right? We have already created Khanij Bidesh India Limited. What is Khanij Bidesh India Limited? It's a JV between 3 PSUs, that is NALCO, HCL and Mineral Exploration and Consultancy Limited, right? और ये कंपनी खुद के बैलेंस शीट के ऊपर से रिसोर्सेज निकालती है एंड ओवरसीज इन्वेस्ट करती है, राइट. So we can buy critical technology, we can buy critical minerals, right? And we can also invest in the domestic market, right? So काफी सारे जो हमारे objectives हैं, जैसे कि अभी हमने ऊपर डिस्कस करा, right, कि when it comes to semiconductor chip manufacturing, we are lagging behind. We do not have access to technology. We do not have access to the required raw materials or intermediate goods that are required, let us say, right? तो अगर इस प्रकार का fund we are able to create, and using this kind of a fund का corpus, we are able to prioritize investment in areas which are of critical importance, ठीक है. तो काफी हेल्प हो सकती है दोस्तों, काफी हेल्प हो सकती है. So the kind of good work that let's say ISRO and DRDO did in their respective domains, if we are able to create this kind of a fund and then leverage this fund to open doorways to reduce or remove obstructions from our path to, let us say, indigenization of critical technologies, then that would be really fantastic दोस्तों. You have to keep that in mind. ये long term view है जो कि लिया जा रहा है, you have to keep that in mind, ठीक है. एक और फंड की बात है. This topic is also not very dramatically different. ब्लू वाटर इकोनॉमी को ध्यान में रखते हुए एक छोटा 25,000 करोड़ का फंड जो है बनाया जा रहा है, राइट. So we may approve a 25,000 crore maritime development fund, राइट. ये लॉन्ग टर्म लो कॉस्ट सपोर्ट प्रोवाइड करेगा ताकि शिप बिल्डिंग, ब्लू वाटर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्रोजेक्ट्स को इंडिया के अंदर सपोर्ट करा जा सके, राइट. सो गवर्नमेंट की माइनॉरिटी शेयर होल्डिंग होगी 26% की, और मेजॉरिटी शेयर होल्डिंग होगी मल्टीलैटरल फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन एंड ग्लोबल फंड्स की, राइट. सो इंडिया के अंदर ऑलरेडी वी हैव a little bit of a base in Alang etc, but it's like actually a ship breaking ecosystem. We have good organizations working in this domain. We just want to scale it up in a big way in terms of shipbuilding, right? So काफी consultation चालू है, right? The idea is to provide money either in the form of debt or in the form of equity or in the form of viability gap funding. So what is viability gap funding? That a lot of projects can come up, and lot of projects can be created, but कैसा होता है ना कि looking at the initial cost, looking at the initial investment, right, etc., etc. So finally, profitability of the project is not there. So to bring that profitability, to bring the project ka viability, you provide some kind of funding. That is what viability gap funding does, right? So गवर्नमेंट के वन ऑफ द 100 days एजेंडा के अंदर अपेरेंटली ये चीज है, राइट, एंड सितंबर एंड डेडलाइन जो है उसको रखा गया है फॉर मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट डिसीजंस, एंड दिस इज अ इंपॉर्टेंट डिसीजन, राइट. सो द आइडिया इज दैट ये नया इनिशिएटिव है, ठीक है. लाइक आई सेड दैट लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स they are still being designed, so we don't know. We'll always get an opportunity to have a look at it again, right? So there is this guy Pushpank Kaushik, right? So he's part of a Singapore-based global logistic and shipping service provider. Says that ये institution is important, right? We are targeting a $5 trillion economy, right? It's a mammoth goal. उसके लिए हमारी logistics industry has to be strong, right? Maritime sector has to be strong. We cannot be dependent on other nations for vessels and so on and so forth, right? So that will be very helpful, right? And जो इंडिया का नैपफिड है, दैट इज नेशनल बैंक फॉर फाइनेंसिंग इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर एंड डेवलपमेंट, उस लाइंस के ऊपर जो है इस फंड को बनाया जा सकता है. नैपफिड वाज क्रिएटेड इन 2021, राइट. सो दैट वाज द आइडिया. सो इट मे बी अ डेडिकेटेड वर्टिकल अंडर नैपफिड, राइट, और इट मे बी अ डेडिकेटेड फंड और एन एंटिटी इन इटसेल्फ. दोनों में से कुछ भी हो सकता है, राइट. द आइडिया बीइंग दैट वी वांट टू प्रमोट मैन्युफैक्चरिंग ऑफ शिप्स ऑफ ऑल टाइप्स एंड साइजेस, right? And we are spending close to $75 billion on leasing ships right now from other countries. India is owning just about 2% of the world's total tonnage, has some 1500 odd ships under its flags, right? So आप देख सकते हैं कि as is state, the present state is pretty weak, and this should be your starting point of the answer. Any answer that you are writing on in future on this topic, this should be your starting point. That $75 billion on leasing ships, only 2% of the world's total tonnage is owned by India, have only 1500 odd ships under our flags, right? India has less than 1% share of the global market shipbuilding के अंदर, right? जहाँ पर complete dominance है China, South Korea, Japan का, right? So it's not, honestly, it's not rocket science कि we cannot build ships in India. So if we can do actually build ships in India, then that would be really fantastic, right? So cheaper funds have to be available, long-term funds have to be available, right? And that's why this fund is going to be very, very important, right? So the target is to have 5% of the world's tonnage, right? 5% of the world's tonnage, यानी कि जो अभी हम लोगों का existing 2% of the world's tonnage है, we want to go to 5%. So you can imagine कि कितना ज़्यादा बड़ा manufacturing effort लगेगा उसके लिए. And in that sense, this MDF, that is your Maritime Development Fund, will be very, very helpful, right? So this fund may be having 25,000 crore rupees. We will be spending it over a period of 7 years. Okay, so you can see that whether it is your sovereign wealth fund or whether it is your maritime development fund, extremely important topics, especially keeping in mind the goal of Viksit Bharat, the goal of $5 trillion economy and whatnot, right? Going back to my topic of 10th, that is today's document, I have this discussion that I want to do with you guys on education. So it's a very simple topic to understand. It's not difficult, not complicated at all, right? इसीलिए मैंने इसको लास्ट के लिए रखा था, so that पहले सारा heavy hitting कर देते हैं, and then we will come back at the end and discuss this particular topic very, very आराम से, ठीक है? So obviously guys, education and development, they are interlinked. Education से we can improve health, we can ensure gender equality, we can promote household prosperity. एजुकेशन के मल्टी जनरेशनल बेनिफिट्स हमारे को देखने को मिल सकते हैं. एंड ऑब्वियसली द प्रॉब्लम इन इंडिया इज नॉट अबाउट द क्वांटिटी बट द क्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशन, राइट? लॉट ऑफ पीपल आर कमिंग आउट ऑफ आवर एजुकेशन सिस्टम आफ्टर हैविंग स्पेंट गुड 15 years 16 years in the education system, and they find that they have not learned anything relevant. They find that they have not picked up any relevant skill. This is not the outcome that we desire, right? So the point over here is that learning outcomes हमारे को optimize करने पड़ेंगे, ensure करने पड़ेंगे, measure करने पड़ेंगे, right? It has to start from the very basic, right? अगर आपके primary school के learning outcomes are not fantastic, then your secondary school के learning outcomes will not be fantastic. Your tertiary education के learning outcomes will not be fantastic. So when it comes to reading, writing, arithmetic, right? इन सब चीजों में हमारे को अच्छा काम करना है. Research clearly shows that whether it was Singapore, Taiwan, Malaysia, Thailand, so these countries which became, let us say, the East Asian miracle in the 70s and 80s, उन्होंने significant investment करा था human capital के अंदर. What is human capital? So human resource is one thing and human capital is another thing. बच्चा पैदा हुआ वो human resource है. उस पैदा हुए हुए बच्चे को आपने अच्छा एजुकेशन दिया, अच्छा हेल्थ केयर दिया, अच्छा न्यूट्रिशन दिया, अच्छा स्किल डेवलपमेंट दिया, एक्सेस टू अपॉर्चुनिटी दिया, एम्पावरमेंट दिया, तब वो जाकर ह्यूमन कैपिटल के अंदर कन्वर्ट होगा. एंड ये ह्यूमन कैपिटल फिर जो है आपके कंट्री के ग्रोथ के अंदर कंट्रीब्यूट कर पाएगा. राइट, इट्स दैट्स जस्ट अ वेरी नैरो एंड चीप वे ऑफ सेइंग थिंग्स. राइट, ह्यूमन कैपिटल फॉर्मेशन इन इटसेल्फ इज इंपॉर्टेंट ऑब्जेक्टिव, उससे ज्यादा बड़ा कोई ऑब्जेक्टिव नहीं है. But if you have good human capital, then you can have production, you can have modernization, you can have innovation, invention, you can have a lot of things, right? So that's why human capital formation is very very important. Whether it needs to be inclusive, मतलब ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए शेड्यूल का, शेड्यूल ट्राइब, ओबीसी का बच्चा is lagging behind, right? ये नहीं होना चाहिए माइनॉरिटी का बच्चा is lagging behind, right? गर्ल बच्चा are lagging behind. लेबर प्रोडक्टिविटी के लिए this is very very important, ठीक है? So obviously when you are having good human capital plus you are having macroeconomic stability, right, then you can go towards high savings, high investments, production increase hoga and prosperity increase hogi. No discussion on education can be complete without taking the name of Pratham and Acer, that is annual survey of education. So Pratham and Acer have repeatedly informed us that what is the level of reading, what is the level of arithmetic that our students are possessing. So obviously Pratham has told us number of times that अब quantity is not the problem or enrollment is not the problem. 99% of eligible children aged 8 and above they are enrolled in school. यानी कि बच्चा स्कूल जा रहा है. ऐसा कहीं नहीं है कि मतलब है, बट ऐसा मेजर लेवल के ऊपर कहीं नहीं है कि बच्चा स्कूल नहीं जा रहा है, राइट. बट प्रॉब्लम यह है कि 57% ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स इन ग्रेड 5 दे आर अनएबल टू रीड ग्रेड 2 लेवल टेक्स्ट, राइट. उसके बाद जो है 75% of students in grade 5, 55% of students in grade 8 they cannot do elementary division operations, right. So ठीक है, मतलब हमारे को मालूम है ये सब प्रॉब्लम्स, राइट. आपको मालूम होने चाहिए कि ये प्रॉब्लम्स एग्जिस्ट करते हैं, राइट. So yes, we have done quite a good job when it comes to technical higher education, right. So IITs, NITs को हमने create कर दिया है. They are some of the best in the world, right. एंड जो इनका आउटपुट है IITs एंड NITs का, इट इज द बेस्ट वर्ल्ड क्लास आउटपुट है, राइट. our graduates from these marquee institutions, they are a part of global companies and corporations and they are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, right. बट जो हमारा फोकस होना चाहिए, राइट, क्वालिटी के ऊपर, दैट हैज बीन मिसिंग क्वाइट अ बिट, राइट. सो प्राइमरी एजुकेशन की इंपॉर्टेंस के बारे में यूनिसेफ ये कहता है कि इट इज द बेडरॉक ऑफ डेवलपमेंट, राइट, वेयर स्टूडेंट्स लर्न फाउंडेशनल स्किल्स दैट प्रिपेयर देम फॉर लाइफ, वर्क एंड एक्टिव सिटीजनशिप, right, empowers children and young people, safeguards their health and well-being, etc etc. So UNICEF का कोट है, अगर आप यूज करना चाहो तो आप यूज कर सकते हो, right. So the idea over here is that we have to not only focus our energies on 3 R's, that is reading, writing and whatever the third R was, we also need to focus on digital literacy and lifelong learning tools, right. We need to focus upon these emerging areas or emerging challenges going ahead. And इसके अंदर जो है मतलब everybody has to play a positive role, whether it is school or parents or a country like India jahan par typically it is falling upon mother's shoulder, not promoting patriarchy, but yeah, right. So maternal literacy is very very important. If maternal is mother is literate, then everything else can be falling in line. I always remember this one line that I used to read on Bombay ka auto rickshaws, mulgi shigli pragati jhali. It's a line in Marathi. Mulgi shigli means the girl child is educated, pragati jhali means the progress is ensured or progress is assured, right. So that's the idea over here, right. So Michael Kramer, who is a Nobel laureate, he speaks of improving school infrastructure, learning materials, changing pedagogy, teacher selection, teacher incentives, these are important interventions. Rukmani Banerjee of Pratham adds that there is the literature on intergenerational transmission of human capital shows that more literate mothers make decisions that improve their children's learnings, right. I mean obviously, right. I mean the idea being over here that it's not the mother's job alone. I would say that कि अगर even if the father was highly educated, like for instance in my case, My father was highly educated as compared to my mother, and we are doing reasonably well for ourselves, right? But okay, right, either which ways, parents have to be educated one way or the other is what I would say, right? So the idea over here is that काफी positive spillovers होंगे, right? Adult literacy campaigns, they are not only useful for adults, right, but बच्चों के भी स्कूल आउटकम्स, स्कूल एजुकेशन आउटकम्स को ये लोग इम्प्रूव कर सकते हैं, राइट? सो आई थिंक दैट या दैट्स अबाउट इट। ओके, एजुकेशन के बारे में अच्छा आर्टिकल है, आप लोग देख सकते हैं इसको। So please try to attempt these questions, right, which are available over here, that discuss the strategic benefits and potential challenges for India in enhancing its semiconductor capabilities through agreements with Singapore, US, and EU, focusing on technology, cost, and supply chain aspects, right? So strategic benefits मैंने आपको explain कर दिया है, लेकिन जो potential challenges इंडिया के सामने और आ सकते हैं उसको आपको थोड़ा देखना पड़ेगा। We have spoken about one challenge, that प्लान्स एंड अग्रीमेंट्स आर ऑल फाइन, एग्जीक्यूशन इज द की, और एग्जीक्यूशन के अंदर हम लोग कई बार लैग बिहाइंड करते हैं। सेकंड क्वेश्चन दैट यू कैन ट्राई टू आंसर इज एनालाइज द रोल ऑफ प्राइमरी एजुकेशन इन इंडियाज डेवलपमेंट, emphasizing the need for quantity to quality transformation, right? And how can improvements in 3 Rs can impact economic growth and societal progress, right? Similarly, there are questions from the previous day that you can try to attempt, right? One is related to India's sovereign wealth fund, and another is related to the Maritime Development Fund. I'll be sharing both these documents with you guys on the Ecoholics app. Do download these documents and do justice to them. We'll meet again tomorrow. Until then, thank you so much. All the best and Jai Hind to all of you.